Separatist leaders in Ukraine's breakaway republics compete for who's in charge. Could this power struggle threaten any hope for peace? I'm Imran Garda, and today's newsmaker is the rebel unrest in eastern Ukraine. While the world's attention was focused on a transfer of power in Zimbabwe, a political transition of a different kind was unfolding in eastern Ukraine. The leader of the self-proclaimed People's Republic of Luhansk said a coup was underway to force him out. Days later, he stepped down, citing health reasons. The thing is, Igor Plotnitsky was a signatory to the Minsk peace agreement, and the man who's taken over isn't. So, where does this leave the only international deal aimed at ending Europe's worst conflict this century? Natalie Perhonen reports.
There's been a power struggle on the streets of Luhansk, which has once again changed the political landscape in the breakaway region of eastern Ukraine. Heavily armed men in camouflage gear blocked entry to government buildings in a pocket of the city. While this was happening, everyday life went on as usual. But within a matter of hours, there was a change in leadership. Igor Plotnitsky, who was the head of the rebel-held region, was replaced by Leonid Pasechnik.
We've always been loyal to the people's will, and now we will follow the path which we have followed during all these years. This is, first of all, a path towards a union with the Russian Federation, being loyal to Minsk agreements, as well as economical and political development of the Republic.
In 2014, Russian-backed separatists in Luhansk and Donetsk declared independence from Ukraine. But as part of the Minsk II peace agreement signed by Russia, Ukraine, France and Germany, the full sovereignty of Ukraine needs to be reinstated, which means that rebel-held areas need to rejoin with the West. They can't pursue a union with Russia. But some separatists in the east accuse Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko and his government of corruption and are in no rush to pursue reconciliation. US President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin talked about Ukraine on a recent call. They both say they want to achieve a lasting peace. But will that goal require the use of American military technology, or will that just escalate tensions? The US National Security Council is considering recommending the president signs off on giving $47 million to the Ukrainian government so it can buy American weapons, including anti-tank missiles. There is technically a full ceasefire between Ukrainian government forces and Russian-backed rebels. But in just 2 nights in November, monitors recorded multiple ceasefire violations, including about 400 explosions. So far, this war has claimed more than 10,000 lives, and that toll only continues to grow each week. Natalie Perhonen, The Newsmakers.
Well, to discuss this, I'm joined now by Andrei Shevchenko in Toronto. He's a former member of the Ukrainian Parliament and is now Ukraine's ambassador to Canada. In Kiev, we have Peter Zalmayev. He's the director of the Eurasia Democracy Initiative, an organization that promotes democracy and human rights in post-communist societies. And in London, Igor Sutyagin. He's a senior research fellow in Russia studies at the Royal United Services Institute, RUSI. Gentlemen, thanks so much for joining us. Peter Zalmayev, let me begin with you. Tell me what happened with this Game of Thrones in Luhansk and if it's going to have any major impact on eastern Ukraine.
Well, it is indeed a sort of a Game of Thrones that we've been witnessing there. And if anything, it shows that the effective leadership of these so-called people's republics in Donetsk and Luhansk have no effective control over their own territories. Basically, what happened is that the former leader, the now deposed leader of the Luhansk People's Republic, Igor Plotnitsky, was overthrown in what appears to be a coup by one of his security agency chiefs. Apparently, there was it was as a result of a turf war between these various agencies. This conflict went back to about 2 years ago. But what is important to understand in all of this is that Mr. Plotnitsky was deposed in an illegal coup, and we have not seen any reaction from either Moscow, which is the de facto sponsor of this regime, or from people on the street. Essentially, their very rationale that they, 3 years ago, they opposed the so-called Kiev junta is essentially null and void, because what you're seeing now is that this is an illegal coup, an illegal overthrow. If it had been done in an illegal manner, the power should have been transferred to the the head of the National Assembly. But as it is, we have this Mr. Leonid Pasechnik, who is an appointee by Moscow. He's an FSB, a security service operative, and it seems like he will now be directly controlled by Moscow. Moscow is basically torn between two different objectives. One is to centralize power and have more control over these two statelets, and the other one is to still keep a semblance of the Minsk process in order, and
Understood.
that has now been thrown into question.
Yeah, and we're going to broaden this out now. Igor, first of all, first things first, is the Kremlin at odds with the FSB here? Do they support different men, or is that just a rumor?
Well, they do not support different. They do not have different agenda. The agenda is, after all, dictated by Moscow. The difficulty for Moscow is that, well, somehow it happened that they are not in the absolute control of what's going on the ground, and that is bad news for them. So, well, this new head of the so-called Luhansk Republic will be controlled more or less effectively from Moscow in general, but in details he would have, well, some freedom of actions, and this fact is very unpleasant news.
Ambassador Shevchenko, Plotnitsky was one of the signatories to the truce in 2015. It's held in I guess, there's been a low-intensity conflict over the past couple of years. It hasn't been great, but it hasn't been massive. Is this all going to unravel now because one of the key signatories is no longer around?
I don't see that changed. We have never had actual ceasefire on the ground. The terrorists have never tried to follow the Minsk agreement, and Moscow has never tried actually to fulfill the Minsk agreements. So in that sense, nothing is going to change on the ground. I think if you can picture a jar with fighting spiders, that will pretty much give you the understanding of what's happening in Luhansk, in Donetsk. There is one thing which I would like to reflect on. I wouldn't agree with Igor that this kind of shows that Moscow is losing control over this territory. Yes, it's a tribal land. There are no rules, no laws in this land, which is occupied by the Russians. But on the other hand, we strongly believe that everything which is happening there is under control of Moscow.
Would you agree, Ambassador Shevchenko, that Moscow is showing signs of wanting to extricate itself from the East? When we look at Vladimir Putin in September saying, hey, maybe we need UN peacekeepers, they might be giving little hints that this is more of a headache for them and they want to get out. Unfortunately, I don't see any clear signs of that, and there was one very important development. When this turmoil started in Luhansk, we learned that quite a substantial portion of Russian troops and Russian tanks immediately crossed into the occupied territory of Ukraine. Across the border, it was next to the city of Krasnodon. So I think it was a very clear manifestation that Russia is in control of this territory, and that Russia will make sure that it will decide, or Moscow will make sure it will decide who is in charge in Luhansk or in Donetsk. Yes, they can sack one war criminal and replace him or her with another one, but it will be in full control of them. Mm-hmm. Peter, do you agree with that?
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. I think it's more, I think Luhansk was different from the neighboring Donetsk in that there was much more disorder on the ground, there was much more infighting, allegations of looting of humanitarian aid, corruption scandals, and it kind of went against this whole Russian narrative that these statelets are much better than the corrupt Ukrainians, that they are really out there to defend people's rights. So I think this is a little bit of an administrative issue, but I would caution that this could potentially impact the Minsk agreements. because Plotnitsky's signature is on those agreements. And it is important that it stays that way. If all of a sudden Plotnitsky is no longer there and it's not clear yet what his fate will be, this may throw into doubt the entire Minsk process, and it may have to be renegotiated.
Right. Igor, is it going to throw into doubt the entire process?
Well, I do not think that it's going to put under question the process, because the process is the Moscow's plot to keep control of these piece of Ukrainian territory and to force Ukrainian concessions. So Moscow is not going to abandon this process. It's their victory. It's when Ukrainians were forced to sign this so-called deal under the threat of continuation of the very, very bloody attack of the Russian forces. So that's why I do not think that the deal will be abandoned by Moscow, first of all. Secondly, I would say that it's not absolutely correct to say that these forces are under Moscow control, and well, there might be some continuation. The fact that these guys are doing their own business there might lead to some escalation of low-level escalation of these clashes on the line between Ukrainian and terrorist forces. And the third point, which I'd like to make, is that probably it's not correct to say that Putin. It's not correct to ask the question whether Russia is going to withdraw. The goal, which is before the Kremlin now, is to mark the progress of the Minsk process in order to avoid supply delivery of lethal weapons to Ukraine. And the way to achieve that is to show that, well, the process is being, situation is being settled down, the actually ceasefire is in place, we are good, we are discussing peacekeepers, so why javelins at all? We're not going to fight. That is the goal of the process.
Right.
And so everything what is made from Moscow is just to mark this so-called progress. It's not to withdraw.
Petro Poroshenko has been looking west, many Ukrainians looking to the Americans for answers or extra help. There were fears that the Americans were going to throw Ukraine under the bus under Donald Trump. It hasn't quite been the case. Let's have a little listen to what Secretary of State Tillerson had to say recently.
The United States recognizes that the war in Ukraine, in which people are still dying every day, must come to an end. We have repeatedly urged Russia to begin the path to peace by honoring its commitments under the Minsk agreements.
Ambassador Shevchenko, that's about as strong as you're going to get from the United States right now. I know that everybody was afraid beforehand because they didn't know what Trump was going to do, and there was a perception that he was going to be soft towards Moscow. But is Washington giving you all the help that you want?
Well, I would say that we're in very good communications, both with Washington, with Ottawa, with our partners in Europe, with Turkey. But of course, I think we would like to see the world being more involved. And I think the recent developments in Luhansk, they should be actually treated as a very serious call for more action on the behalf of our friends and our partners.
Yeah.
Let's remember about MH17. Let's remember about the enormous amount of weapons in this tribal land. And let's think of possible consequences and of people who keep dying every day. But when it comes to international support, I think we would like to see more action, and I think a possible peacekeeping operation into the east of Ukraine is one of the very important avenues to consider.
Nobody wants to fight Russia, do they, Ambassador Shevchenko? So would you understand why the Europeans and the Americans will say, okay, sanctions and tough words, but we don't want to go to war with Russia over Ukraine?
Well, neither would like to fight Russia. We would not like to fight Russia either, but there is a reality. I think we should really understand that Russia is waging a war not just on Ukraine. It's challenging the free world. It's challenging its neighbors, and we understand that we fight not just for us, but for many of our neighbors. And we strongly appreciate those countries who do understand this and who support this. And to Turkey is one of the examples. I think it's very important that Turkey has a very strong message on territorial sovereignty of Ukraine, that President Erdogan helped us to get Crimean Tatar leaders, Chegos and Umerov, from Russian jails. I think this is that kind of solidarity that we need.
Peter Zalmayev, the OSCE is reporting there has been a spike in violence. The death toll has gone up somewhat recently. We're in this kind of low-intensity state of conflict, but, you know, we shouldn't forget more than 10,000 people have been killed and millions have been displaced. As the solution, some are calling for the U.S. to arm Ukraine with, quote, defensive weapons. There's an understanding that the U.S. National Security Council is planning to send $47 million worth of defensive weapons to Ukraine. Do you accept, Peter, that from the Russian perspective, that will never be seen as defensive weapons? That will be seen as Washington sending attacking weapons to Ukraine and Washington pointing missiles at Moscow?
Absolutely. Whether they think deep down in their hearts, and I mean President Putin, Prime Minister Medvedev, whether it will be offensive or defensive, no doubt the way it will be presented to the public, to the Russians, is that it is an attack on Russia. And I think that this is a very real perspective. America has come very close to deciding to arm Ukraine with lethal weaponry. It will be decided in Congress. There's still no guarantee that it will pass, but there's a good likelihood that it will. Then it will reach the White House, which will be in a position to veto or to keep this in place. And as we see, Donald Trump, no matter how friendly he is to Mr. Putin, he has been hamstrung by allegations of his campaign's connection, relations with the Russians, and as a result of the Robert Mueller's probe that we're seeing now, a lot of his members of his administration have been questioned, have been under suspicion. So I think that Donald Trump will be placed in very difficult circumstances and may have to just go along with this congressional decision should Congress vote for lethal weaponry for Ukraine.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting. Igor, Washington sending arms to Ukraine, is that going to help fast-track peace or spiral us into complete and utter destruction?
Well, Russia, to be honest, cannot afford another spiral of this, another round of this confrontation. It's very difficult. Russia does not have money to finish construction of its most valuable strategic nuclear submarine. So that's why I do not think that it will spiral. First of all. Secondly, well, it's probably worth recalling that just 9 days ago, the final decision to start delivery of the same sort of weapons, javelins, to Georgia was authorized by the State Department. And so delivery will start in a couple of months' time. So I do not think that Russia is going to fight. They try to frighten everybody. They try to frighten everybody against helping the country which is a victim of the Russian aggression. And that is actually the matter of the, stamina of those who leave or do not leave to their own obligations under Budapest Agreement.
Right.
So Russia is not going to start war.
Imran,
come in, Ambassador.
If I can clarify something on the weapons, we should understand what's happening on the ground. We have to fight the Russian aggression with the weapons of the 20th century, while we have in front of us aggressors with the weapons of the 21st century. And I think the world is coming to understand in this situation, because Moscow has been testing very sophisticated weapons in our land. And probably one of the very few ways to prevent further escalation is to make sure that they realize that they can get proper response from the Ukrainian side. And it's very practical. When you're at the front line and when you understand that you can use your weapons without any risk of getting a response from the other side, then there is a huge temptation to do so. We want to avoid that. There are two ways to put more pressure on Moscow. One of them is more sanctions, and the other one is to make sure that Ukraine has weapons to defend itself.
Yeah, Peter, very finally, have Ukrainians had to adjust their expectations as the months have tumbled along? I spoke to President Poroshenko at the beginning of 2016. He said, by the end of the year, we're going to have Crimea back. That deadline came and went. It's been almost 2 years on. Crimea is in the hands of the Russians. It has been annexed, and those Russian-supported separatists are going nowhere in the east. Has Ukraine had to adjust its expectations and maybe accept some facts on the ground?
It's obviously been normalized in the sense that most Ukrainians have come to terms with the fact that this is becoming a protracted, frozen conflict, sort of on the lines of the Transnistria conflict that's been going on for a couple of decades now. De facto, Ukraine will not and should not acknowledge Russia's sovereignty over either eastern Ukraine or the Crimea, but I think, I'm sorry, de jure, but de facto, I think that's the new reality, and I think Poroshenko has been doing the right thing by putting Ukraine's own house in order, by trying to enact anti-corruption reforms to strengthen the military, and that has proceeded quite successfully and has been noted by Ukraine's Western partners. But you're absolutely right. I think that most Ukrainians now will tell you they're not very optimistic about a speedy resolution to the conflict.
Okay, Peter Zalmayev, Igor Sutyagin, and Ambassador Andrei Shevchenko. It's been a good discussion. I thank you all for joining us here on the Newsmakers. Still ahead, the Bollywood film that's creating quite a stir across India. Should causing offence be grounds to get it banned? And the Belgian government plans to take over the country's biggest mosque. Would that be a victory against extremism or hurt religious freedom? Welcome back to the Newsmakers. It hasn't even been released yet, but a Bollywood film called Padmavati has caused riots across India. There's even a reward for beheading the lead female actor and director. So why all the fuss? Well, the film is based on a 16th century Sufi poem, which tells the story of a Hindu queen's encounter with a Muslim king. But many in India, including the ruling political parties, say the film distorts historical facts. Meanwhile, historians say the whole thing is a myth. So in India, is trying to prevent riots more important than freedom of expression? Kim Vanel takes a look.
Bollywood is an escape from reality. A journey to a dramatic, usually happier world. So why then has Bollywood's latest offering, Padmavati, from one of India's most respected directors, sparked this?
The deadly twist in the Padmavati row, and now a dead body was found hanging at the Nahargarh fort in Jaipur in Rajasthan.
Protests have turned violent, demonstrators writing their demands in blood.
It is seditious. It is something that is made only to insult Hindus.
One major politician calling for the film's director and lead actress to be murdered.
If anyone beheads them, we will award $1.5 million to that person.
The tale in question is ancient, a story every child in India knows. A Hindu queen marries the Rajput ruler of Chittor, only to see him killed in a duel. Then, as Alauddin Khalij, the Muslim Sultan of Delhi, comes to capture her, she takes her own life. A story of love and honour on the surface, but critics say a scene depicting an affair between the Queen and the Sultan distorts history and offends the Rajput people. However, not only is it agreed by most historians that Padmavati never existed, the real clincher, according to the film's director,
through this video, I am once again reiterating that there is no such sequence in our film.
Films in India have to go before a censorship board before they can be released. By law, it means a film shall not be certified for public exhibition if, in the opinion of the authority competent to grant the certificate, the film or any part of it is against the interests of the sovereignty and integrity, the security of the state, friendly relations with foreign states, public order, decency or morality, or involves defamation or contempt of court, or is likely to incite the commission of any offence. In this case, critics argue the security of the state is compromised by Padmavati's release. Censorship is nothing new in India. Dozens of films have been banned over the years, some for their adult content, but others for their portrayal of historic events. Now, however, filmmakers are united and are fighting back.
Our job is expression, and now we are forced to fight for the freedom of expression. Why?
Padmavati's release has already been delayed, and the censorship board has yet to make a decision. Forced to rule on a much wider question of what India values more, peace or freedom of expression. Kim Vanel, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now from New Delhi is former Army General Dr. Himanshu, now a spokesman for Karni Sena, the group leading the protest against the film. Also in New Delhi is Madhu Kishwar. She's the founder of the human rights organization Manushi. And completing our panel, we have journalist and film critic Anna Vetikad. Let me start with you, Himanshu. You don't like the film. You want it to be banned. In a sentence, tell me what's wrong with the film.
Well, the corollary that is being drawn, the parallel, that I think is not correct. It has nothing to do with censorship. Firstly, it was an irresponsible statement on the part of one of the leading actors in the film, Padmavati, who is playing the character Alauddin Khilji, Shri Ranveer Singh Ji, who probably enjoys or has a special relationship with the leading lady in the movie. He made a responsible statement when asked by the media people that is he not risking his career at this stage when he's doing so well by playing a villain. He said if he can have few intimate scenes with the concerned leading lady, then he's ready to risk playing the villain. This all did raise certain apprehensions in certain sections of the society because the character the leading lady is playing is a very revered one.
Okay,
it's very near and dear to millions of people.
Let me ask you, have you
seen a respected character?
Have you seen the scene? Because the director says there's no such scene that actually exists. So they're saying that all your anger and your response is for something that doesn't even exist.
No, I don't agree with that because the producer and the director of the movie, they were approached, and the censor board also, and various government departments were approached by responsible citizens, including High Court justices, retired, academia, and certain people who know the folklore and other specialists in the regional matters. India, as you should understand, is a multi-ethnic country. It's a delicate situation.
Yeah, but
the diversity of this country is its
certainly,
strength.
And I don't mean to disrespect you, and I'm sorry. I'm sorry to come in here. Look, it's helped. A delicate situation is only a delicate situation if enough angry people claim it's a delicate situation. Your group, Karni Sena, attacked the director and vandalized the set at the very beginning, which brought this into the spotlight.
That is again, I protest.
You did not attack the set?
In fact, they had come after. No, it is being misquoted and misunderstood. Let me clarify. 6 months prior to this incident, the concerned person was, we did apprise him, we did ask him for an explanation of our apprehensions, and if he could have answered that with sensitivity and sensibility, it could have been nipped in the bud. He chose not to answer. I understand, I give him a benefit of doubt. Why should he answer to every Tom, Dick and Harry? We served him a notice also, to which again he chose not to answer.
Okay.
He could have answered. And
okay, so Himanshu, you wanted it nipped in the bud.
Clarification.
Certainly.
So when, let me one sentence.
Okay. Okay, you wanted it nipped in the bud, right?
One sentence.
But
when he was approached, the incident you are mentioning, sir, when he was approached, there also the people had gone to seek the explanation because everybody can't go to that city.
So you wanted an explanation.
Bouncers probably fired,
and you
although
feel it
they
didn't
fired
happen.
in air, but that was a provocation.
Okay, you say it's a provocation. Things have unraveled as a result of it, and now we're seeing politicians offering bounties for the beheading of the director and the lead actress. Just for the record, do you find that to be as repulsive as millions of other people find that, or do you find that justifiable?
No, I don't think any form of violence, and please quote it, underline.
Yeah.
quote, underline, we don't justify and we do not advocate, rather we condemn and dissociate ourselves as a disciplined organization, responsible organization of any form of violence, because we are people who waited for 1 year. Now everybody's response or protest, we have to understand human psychology may not be one and same. We can't be held accountable for everybody who does something. The way people respond differently. These are certain sections of the society with whom we do not associate and we do not agree, and rather certain things we condemn also, like chopping
and you've
off
put
the
that
nose
quite
of a lady.
clearly. Fair enough.
Is our organization. One sentence allow me.
Okay,
one
go
sentence
ahead.
allow me. Here we are fighting for the dignity of a lady, for a dignity of a lady who is held in high esteem. How can we be associated with some irresponsible statement like that? Would that be dignified, chopping off the lady's nose? We condemn that.
I'm glad to hear that.
However,
Madhu Kishwar.
we expect
Fair
equal
enough.
sensitivity.
Fair enough. Okay, Madhu Kishwar, does Himanshu have a point, and is his protest justified? Should the film be banned?
Firstly, you cannot ask for a ban of a film before you know what is in it. Now, there I think Himanshu has a point that many attempts were made to get the directors to share the manuscript. Now, some would say that amounts to pre-censorship. I see it differently. When you're dealing with a concrete historical figure, in that case, if there are historical records and there are actually descendants of that particular royal family, then you need to demonstrate that you have done due diligence and you could have taken into account the questions being raised, shared the script, and brought them on board. It was easy.
Right.
I have no idea why it was not done.
Madhu, let me...
Despite
Certainly.
needed. One more. This is not the first time that people are offering bounties and people are issuing death threats. For example, in the case of Salman Rushdie, Taslima Nasreen, this was done and it was made to acquire a certain legitimacy. Let me also tell you, way back in the 1980s, it was feminist organizations which had led a movement to ban the obscene portrayal of women and obscenity being described in the most vague, idiotic terms. Now, there's already a law that was brought in by so-called progressive feminists, which could easily be invoked to get so many things banned. Mine was the lone voice to warn my feminist sisters that they were inviting trouble and the law would only be misused, etc. Now that history is forgotten. And the very same people who invoked that law are today standing for freedom of expression.
Okay, fair enough. And I have
to make
certainly,
be consistent.
You see a contradiction. I'm going to ask that question I had in mind for you a little bit later on. I want to bring Anna in here. Anna, do you understand that given the sensitivities, given the hundreds of millions of people who disagree on some very fundamental things and that they hold to be very sacred, when it comes to cinema and when it comes to freedom of expression, sometimes we have to be a little bit careful in order to prevent riots, in order to prevent absolute public disorder. Anna, do you accept that that might have to be the case, that there might need to be some caution here?
Imran, what is the definition of caution? This is a perfect example of victims being blamed for the violence that is being perpetrated by the Karni Sena. This gentleman, Himanshu, who is on your show just now, very clearly said something unwittingly that I think perfectly illustrates what every filmmaker's reaction has to be to violent organizations like this. He said that a filmmaker, he understands, cannot respond to every Tom, Dick or Harry. And that is the truth. The Karni Sena is every Tom, Dick or Harry. They have absolutely no right to demand a script from a filmmaker. There is only one organization in this country that is authorized to be filtering films, and in fact, the actions of that organization, in itself are under scrutiny, the Central Board of Film Certification, because there are many liberals who feel, including many liberal filmmakers, that the Central Board of Film Certification should not have a right to cut films and should not have a right to do anything beyond rate films as adult or non-adult. Who is Himanshu to be asking for the script of a film from a filmmaker, I'll tell you why they are doing it. Imran, they're doing it because they were nobodies till a few months ago, and now they are somebodies sitting on TRT World and being covered by international organizations and the national media, and this gives them a huge platform to enter into the electoral fray if they choose to. First thing, and the second point is, I am so shocked that Madhu Kishwar is actually sort of supporting the Karni Sena. It doesn't matter that Padmavati was or wasn't a historical figure. There are many historians who dispute her very existence. But even if she did exist, you cannot give the law into the hands of violent organizations that have not only threatened violence against the team of this film, but have actually indulged in violence.
So let's get Madhu's response. Madhu?
You know, it's so easy to twist somebody's argument out of shape and emote so profusely. The point that I made is this. Either she is being treated as a historical figure or she's not. Now, the filmmaker needs to make a clear statement. Is she a fantasy creature? In which case, it will be treated differently. But they are using Alauddin Khilji, whose existence nobody doubts. Okay, he is a historical figure, and there is.
But Madhu, this is connected to my. Hold on. It's I want to add a question to it. It's connected to my other question. Madhu, 1 second. Madhu, 1 second. It's connected to my other question. Give me a second, if you don't mind. I beg you. For example, Braveheart. It stinks historically. William Wallace was real. It stinks historically. Mel Gibson did a complete butchering of history. Historians said it was a bad job. People disputed it. There's 50 videos on YouTube to show you the historical inaccuracy. But so what? It's a piece of art. Why don't people get over it, Madhu?
By all means, if you say it's a piece of art, the point is that that Bollywood, sadly, has a very bad track record in dealing with history. In Hollywood, you have a mixture of all kinds, which is the good, the bad, and the indifferent. In case of Bollywood, it has a consistent track record of gross distortion, no matter who the theme is, whether Hindu, Muslim, Christian, whatever. You know, I'm not talking about Hindu sensibilities, I'm not talking about Rajput sensibilities. Even Mughal emperors and their lives have been really beaten out of shape. They bear no resemblance. The point that I'm trying to make is simply this. If it is history, and there are people who own that dynasty or who are people, like for example, if somebody wanted to make a film on Anna's grandmother, now Anna would have a right to simply, 1 second,
Okay, hold on for a second. I want to bring in Himanshu. Hold on for a second, because we're running out of time. Listen, there are 2.5 minutes left, so I want to bring in, hold on, both of you, please, if you don't mind. I want to bring in Himanshu for a second. Himanshu, can you respond to the claim that you are every Tom, Dick, and Harry here, and you're just using mob tactics to silence people you don't like? It's change your film or else, which has created chaos on the ground right now. Respond to that.
No, we haven't. We rather accuse the producer and director of this movie that they have created because they are soliciting controversy deliberately. As we see, some controversy which could have been very amicably and very reasonably, logically, with wisdom, could have been resolved and nipped in the bud. They have allowed it to grow deliberately because they seek cheap publicity, which gives them TRPs. What the lady is accusing us of, we can accuse the same. There's no end to finger pointing. I'm not trying to play a referee, but could not it have ended amicably? Could not, and it is not any Tom, Dick, and Harry. They were High Court justices, retired, by the way, who had approached. They were academia. They were not any Tom, Dick, and Harry. They are authorities in the folklore. They are authorities in history. They were the people. Are they? They are nobody. So they have acted very responsibly. Could not the actor have restrained himself making such irresponsible statements? Well, what is the relationship between the two is their personal matter. We are not bloody any peeping Toms. That is their purpose. But then, when you speak about an icon, I think you would need to be responsible.
Okay.
That is what we are pleading.
Okay, so
I am the voice of sanity.
Okay.
I'm trying to raise the voice of sanity.
And a final response from you, please.
This country, frankly, somebody has been killed. Somebody has been killed. And somebody has made stupid type of remarks which in a way trigger a communal type of tensions.
Okay.
Here is, try to understand.
Understood.
Malik Muhammad Zaisi,
there's a
Muslim, wrote
context.
such a beautiful, we are not idiots.
Okay.
Just a minute, allow me one sentence. Allow me one sentence.
Okay, go for it.
Allow me one sentence. Malik Muhammad Zaisi, a Muslim, has written such a beautiful piece of art. It's a piece of literary classic. We appreciate that. How is it that the discourse or narrative is being changed to? We are not responsible for that.
Okay.
I'm also saying any Tom, Dick and Harry raising stupid comments or relating to us is not our responsibility. And we have moved to court. We have knocked every door. We have knocked every government and every door. We have done our job.
Imran is totally bizarre. First, his organization indulges in violence. Then he says they are not responsible for the violence. It's as simple as this. We have elections coming up in a very important
He fired the shot. He fired the shot. Correct your facts. Correct your facts. He fired the shots.
Has been supported by the present ruling party. Therefore, the Karni Sena knows that they have their support and they have used this to get publicity for themselves. And as it happens, Madhu Kishwar is also a supporter of the ruling party, which is why she is justifying the misbehavior and the hooliganism of the Karni Sena. Padmavati, in all probability, was a mythical queen. For this whole brouhaha to have been raised about a mythical queen in a film that neither Madhu Kishwar nor Karni Sena has seen is beyond ridiculous.
Pompous. You sound like a pompous ass. You're not listening to people and you are just pontificating. You don't even know who you're talking to. You don't know who you're talking to. You don't know what the history of those respective people are. Stop behaving like...
From violent organizations like Karni Sena and people like Madhu Kishwar who couch their support to such violent organizations in sophisticated terms.
Okay.
She just called a pompous act because
would you support the publication of satanic verses? Would you allow and support the ban on satanic verses to be lifted? Would you support it? I'll take a PIL tomorrow. Will you support it?
Question to ask to a woman who was a child when the satanic verses was banned.
I don't want to go down Salman Rushdie. I don't want to talk about Salman Rushdie. That's another segment. Okay, so, Anna and Madhu and Himanshu. Okay. Okay, Anna, Himanshu and Madhu. I've got to move on. I've got other guests lined up.
Will you support it?
Okay, I've got other guests lined up. I have to move on. I have to move on. I've got other guests lined up, and I thank you all for joining us here on the Newsmakers. It's clear that opinions differ over the movie Padmavati. Madhu Kishwar, Himanshu, and Anna Vetikad, I thank you for taking the time to join us here on the Newsmakers. It's Belgium's biggest and oldest place of Muslim worship. And now the government wants to take it over. They say it's home to Saudi-backed extremism. Last month, they moved to expel the mosque's imam, citing national security concerns. But that's been blocked by the courts. Yet the country is still under intense pressure to tighten security, with several Belgian citizens involved in European terror attacks. If the takeover of Brussels' Grand Mosque goes ahead, will that put an end to radicalization, or could it further alienate Belgian Muslims? Well, to discuss this, we're joined now from Brussels by Michael Privat. He is the director of the European Network Against Racism. And in Vienna, Farid Hafiz, he's a lecturer at the University of Salzburg, as well as a scholar with Georgetown University's Islamophobia research project known as the Bridge Initiative. Thanks for joining us, gentlemen. Michael, should the state be taking over this mosque?
Thank you. Well, I think that's a move that can be understandable from the point of view of the internal Belgian politics. But I think if you allow me that we need to put a few things in context. So as you might be aware of, Belgium as a state recognized Islam as an official religion in 1974. And immediately there was an agreement between the King of Belgium at the time and the King of Saudi Arabia to give over or to lend that building, which has become the Grand Mosque, for 99 years. That mosque has been the center center actually of many important things, because for nearly 20 years until the mid-90s, it has been like the center for Muslims to turn to get information about their religion, because at that point in time, Morocco and Turkey, which were the countries where the most important Muslim communities in Belgium were coming from, and not really started to invest in the field of Islam so far. So it played so the center, the Islamic Center, the Grand Mosque, played a very important role in the organizing of Islam in Belgium. And that was that role, I mean, lost a little bit of traction, as in the mid-90s there was the setting up by the Muslims themselves of the Executive of Muslims in Belgium, and therefore the mosque was less important in terms of the organizing of Islam, but remained very central in terms of disseminating information about Islam. I mean, any mosque or any individual could just call the mosque and ask, you know, for books about Islam, for Qur'ans. They've been sending out youngsters born in Belgium to study in Saudi Arabia, in Medina in particular, and come back and teach about Islam in the very specific way that was taught to them in Medina. They've been also they have been operating for a couple of decades, I think, a social service whereby Muslims could come and have fatwas about every aspect of their life. So they've been very at the cutting edge of disseminating a very conservative, very Islam, very close to what the official position of Saudi Arabia about Islam. And then the final thing, I think, which has been triggering is that there has been questions about the role, finally, of the type of Islam that's been so vastly disseminated in Belgium, and questions have been raised for more than a decade. Of course, after the bombings in Paris and definitely in Brussels, a number of voices have been, including from within the Muslim communities, have been asked that, I mean, Belgium take over the mosque back. And the fact is, and I'm just in a minute, that during the parliamentary inquiry that just closed after 1.5 years of work, I mean, when the responsible individuals at the mosque were called in, they really showed a lot of disdain towards the parliamentarians and the Belgian elected people, and that, of course, did give a very bad image of the Grand Mosque.
I've got to bring Farid in.
I think it has been also contributing for...
I've got to bring Farid in. Farid, okay, so do you understand? Belgium has had its issues with terrorism recently. The Brussels attacks were awful, and I guess not least because so many of the attackers came from within. They came from Molenbeek. They were children of the soil, right? Belgium's going, hey, how can we undercut the ideological underpinnings here? We seem to have a problem with a masjid which has Salafi Wahhabi ideology at its core. Maybe we need to look at this. Do you understand where they're coming from, Farid, and why they might want to take over the mosque?
Well, there is two things to say at this point. I think, first of all, I'm not so much into this very specific case, but you always have to ask a very specific question, which is, in this case, has the mosque anything to do with the terrorists? And if the imam at the mosque has preached violence or terrorism, and as far as I've understood this was not the case, then you can talk about these issues of trying to interfere. And interference in that sense would mean, like, you bring this person to court, a person who incites violence and terrorism. But if this is not the case, and we have a very generalized debate which fools into racist discourse, then we have to be very cautious here. The other thing is, like, a general tendency which I would say we can observe throughout Europe is that many European nation states and governments have an attempt and show an attempt, especially by the ministries of interior, to take control and to try to define what the religion of Islam should look like. And I think that's a very problematic aspect. Right. So on the one side, you understand that the state wants to control, but that's always the question, like how much can he interfere really into issues of religion? How liberal should he be? And what really, like, the limits of pluralism are?
Okay, so Michael, two things here. Firstly, has there been any evidence, actionable, empirical evidence, that shows that there was a link between the imam or whatever was said in the mosque and a terror attack? And secondly, when I put this into context and I look at the Brussels mayor, Ivan Meyer, saying, everyone knows that all mosques in Brussels are in the hands of Salafists. That's quite a big statement, right? Everyone? I mean, how can he be so sure? When I think of those two things, Farid has a point, doesn't he? It seems as if the Belgians are trying to kind of use a very blunt instrument in trying to solve their problems of extremism.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, there is, well, in the public, there is absolutely no clear evidence that there is a link between some statements of the Imam of the Grand Mosque and the fact that he would have been himself or the team of the mosque radicalizing young people towards violent extremism and sending them to join Daesh. That's absolutely clear. And well, unless there, well, at least in the public, what we can know, there is nothing of that sort. The other statement of the previous mayor of Brussels is completely an overstatement, and he was totally denounced as such by all sides within the communities and also within the larger public debate, saying there's a sweeping statement that is actually very harmful and polarizing further the population. But the fact is that in Brussels in particular, indeed, I mean, the Salafi ideology has been going quite far and is very, very widespread today. So that's also a fact. But saying that most of the mosques and so forth, this is completely an overstatement. Now the point is, it's very true that what I think that the Belgian government is trying to say, of course, is they need to do something. And I think that reclaiming the mosque is something that can show to the population like, hey, we did something. We are trying to confront Salafi / Wahhabi type of Islam, and look, we are effectively doing something. Right. But the point is I'm sure until now, and I have no clear sign that what's the next step. They don't know. So there has been, as I said, signals that they could ask the executive of Muslims in Belgium, which I think would be the good institution to talk to take over that mosque. Where I would slightly disagree with Farid is that indeed there is an increasing tendency from European states to try to mingle into Islam and to try to mold it one way. But I think they are not at that point yet. For now, what they are trying to do is to work on what is the concrete logistical side of Islam, not going into theology and those kind of things. Okay. Actually, they are not telling what they would like to see, but what they don't want to see.
Strong point, Michael and Farid. I'd love to go on, but I have to move on. I thank you both for joining us here on the Newsmakers. It's been good to get both your thoughts. That's all for this edition of the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garda. You can check out more of our stories on YouTube, Facebook and Twitter. Remember to like, follow and subscribe. Next time, Pakistan's law minister resigns after weeks of protests. Is it a sign of people power or the government caving to religious extremists? Until then, thank you for watching. Bye-bye.